Hello and welcome to another edition of the Aussie Ideas Man. I figured it was about time I got back to using my logic when it comes to what other people are saying about Aptera. I spent a couple of days in Cairns, got on a cruise ship for 16 days, ended up in Auckland, New Zealand, and with two friends and my wife, we drove around the North Island on a holiday. So that's why I've been so long not actually making a video. For the most part, I never had much access to the internet. Not to worry, just proves those clowns that keep saying I have no life and no friends wrong. And I love proving people wrong. In this instance, I'll put my laptop on a chair beside where I sit comfortably so that I can not record the bounce as I breathe. And also, I intend to show my face because I've chosen tailosive EV as the subject matter for my opinions. And I'm going to put my face beside his where he uses his face. Having watched his whole rant, and it is a rant, something I've been accused of often, and well, why not? The negative side of Aptera deserves somebody ranting somewhat. In any case, having watched his rant, it is so long that I can't rant along with him without breaking it up into about 4 parts. So hopefully I'll spend a lot of time making this video and then slice it up into 4 versions so that people don't get bored out of their brain. Still, the intent is to inform and give people more chance to act on informed decisions rather than the plethora of one-sided information that they swallow, and those people providing the information often block anybody trying to say anything that doesn't promote Aptera. So let's see how we go.
Aptera is by far the most exciting startup company in the world for me because, yes, there's this whole push towards electrification, but in my head, there's really only one startup brand, at least in the United States, that I can see that's interested in making self-powered vehicles. And there's a lot of doubt and a lot of skepticism surrounding them because they've been around for so long. And I think what's annoying me in the Aptera community is that there's a lot of people that just want to see production start. And until production starts, it's a scam. It's vaporware. And in my opinion, these are the same people that would have doubted Tesla or been skeptical of Tesla and claimed Elon Musk was a scammer back in the 2009-2010 era, because a lot of the reasons people claim Aptera is going to fail is because, well, they've had to delay their products or there's not a guarantee that they're going to make it. You know, they're still trying to secure funding. Tesla went through all of these similar issues, and they're actually in a very similar position to Tesla was back in the day. Tesla was weeks away from bankruptcy, and there was
I can't even get a word in edgewise. I don't know where to stop and make comments. This guy is a real motor mouth, and he's 90 to the dozen. And I don't believe people can get a balanced view from what he has to say. He's just, I don't know, off the chart. Well, this is a practice just to see how I go at recording my views alongside his. I don't know who these people are that say it's a scam because they are not producing yet. I'm not one of them. I say it's likely to be a scam for lots of other reasons. Not producing them yet is only a small matter.
Tesla was weeks away from bankruptcy, and they received a loan from the federal government that kept them afloat. And yes, through hardship and hard work, they were able to get into production and support themselves through that loan and pay it back with interest early. So yes, I'm happy Tesla is no longer being propped up by the federal government anymore. But a lot of people just, I think, forget about that and instantly assume that, well, because Aptera doesn't immediately have the billions of dollars needed to start production, therefore they're a scam, and they are actually just trying to rip everybody off. And we keep hearing about delays with production, and that means that it's never going to happen. What I want to remind everybody is that good things take time. And I definitely think in the EV community, there's this obsession with startups needing to start production in order for them to have made it. We just act like, oh, okay, well, they're a real brand now. They're no longer a scam, and they no longer fit the textbook definition of vaporware.
He's blowing my mind. I just can't pick a place to stop him still. But he's talking nonsense. I don't even know of anybody who says these things. The only person I know of that speaks of comparing with Tesla is Bruce Nelson, and he's the opposite. He's saying Aptera does better than Tesla, and that's why he makes the comparison, which is a load of hogwash in and of itself. But in any case, Aptera went broke, and in my opinion, there's suspicion that that was a Ponzi scheme, a premeditated scam. Aptera's own history is enough to damn them. We don't need a comparison with Tesla.
They're no longer a scam, and they no longer fit the textbook definition of vaporware as soon as they have delivered a vehicle. Therefore, because Aptera has not delivered a vehicle, that means they're a scam. Whereas in reality, we've been following lots of EV startups over the past few years, and the truth is, I think what I've learned from watching a lot of these startups is that once you start production, that doesn't immediately solve all of your problems. In fact, it can create whole new ones, because when you're in mass production, you have to spend a whole lot more money than when you're in the development phase. Where Aptera is right now, they've laid off a lot of their employees to cut costs. They're not in mass production yet, so they don't have to be spending as much of these other startup companies. But the reason they're taking their time is because they don't want to start production slowly. This is something that they've talked about in interviews. It's something that they've learned from Sandy Munro, who has helped dozens of startups, including Tesla, and worked with legacy automakers for decades and has all of this industry experience on here's how you bring a product to market. And Sandy has explained to them, I'm sure in more detail than I can, about what happens if you try to start production prematurely. And I think we've actually seen what can happen to brands that try to start production and prioritize that over anything else, like Lucid. Sorry, I know they're the butt end of most of my jokes, but the other good example would be Lordstown Motors.
Well, I hope you're not getting a headache. What can I get out of what he said so far? The speed he talks at just makes my head not take in everything he's saying. I just can't keep up with him. Okay, but he's raving on about production, and I just think he's crossing bridges before we get to them, and you can't make excuses for things in the future. We've got to concentrate on what's happening now. I've always said not to compare with others, and he, of course, is telling critics not to compare with Tesla, but he's happy to compare with Lucid, Lordstown, and just generally all the others because he's watched them and said, well, I don't know what he's saying because it just seems so meaningless to me. I hope I can be clearer in some of his future points, but for these ones now, they just don't seem relevant.
Most of my jokes. But the other good example would be Lordstown Motors. They delayed their production several times and it ended up taking longer than they thought, but they put all of this emphasis towards, okay, we need to start production because we're losing our investors and everyone doesn't believe in us and thinks we're a scam. So, okay, let's actually start production. And they start, and they were only able to make about 50 of them before they had to pause production and realize, oh crap, we're having a lot of quality control issues with these vehicles. And they had to recall all of the endurance pickup trucks, and on top of that, once they finally got it tested by the EPA, it had really head-scratching terrible efficiency. The range is crap and the weight is high, and it's actually more inefficient than the Hummer EV, which I didn't even think that was possible for an electric truck, but they somehow found a way to do it on a truck that's a lot smaller than the Hummer. Why is the range so bad? Why is the efficiency so bad? Well, I have to imagine it's because they're recycling a lot of their existing manufacturing plant and trying to retrofit components and pieces that were meant for a gas pickup truck, not an electric one, and also a lot of rushing things to market. Well, the investors want us to start production. Everyone's saying, hey, you're a scam, hey, you're not real. So, okay, let's start production so that we please everybody, but then you can't build as many of them, which means you can't secure revenue as quickly, and they're probably losing money on every truck they deliver. And we're seeing a fairly similar story with Lucid Air. No, they haven't been stopping production as much as Endurance or doing as many recalls, but the first few Lucid Airs that were delivered were definitely riddled with software issues, and a lot of original Lucid Air deliveries had to be taken back for service several times over and over. And on top of that, Lucid is still burning through cash, and none of their vehicles are turning a profit, even with their super high prices. And on top of that, they have demand issues. So there's definitely, in my opinion, a wrong way to enter production. And I think it's very wise for Aptera not to jump into limited production. And that's part of the reason that they're in the securing funding stages right now, is because they're trying to make sure that when they do start production, they start building fast. And they have high yields from their carbon composite pieces, and they're working with CPC over in Italy on mass producing lots of different components of the vehicle and then shipping them to San Diego for final assembly. And they're trying to get everything right and optimize for high volume production so that their vehicles have decent margins and they're not running at a loss as soon as production does start. And I think,
well, you can understand why I don't even smile while watching this stuff. It is just, oh well, I'm still lost for words for what it is. Who on earth could enjoy somebody raving on at 100 miles an hour? I've watched the thing through, and I know that there are things that I can say that really knock his arguments on the head, but at the moment, it's probably not worth getting into the nitty-gritty of the things he says, because he goes so fast, I just can't be bothered going through them and picking them out. The important thing here is to say that all of these comparisons with Rivian, Lucid, and all the other startups he's watched, and his opinions about what they're doing wrong, are totally irrelevant. And I made that point, I think, the last time I watched a chunk of his work. It's just irrelevant. We need to know that the Aptera prototypes work. We need to know that they are on track with the finances. We need to know all the things about Aptera and not about Rivian, Lordstown, Hummer, and I'm hard pressed to think of all the others he's mentioned. We don't need to know who Sandy Munro has helped in the past. When it comes to Sandy Munro, we have little evidence that he is helping. They say he is, but boy, the evidence is missing, as is evidence all round. So I'll just try to wade through this stuff and probably won't get to anything of great value in this first video. I've decided that I can't take watching all 19 minutes of him again in one go and creating the 4 videos in one go. I'll just decide when to stop on a time basis and put one out, and then maybe have a little bit of a rest from the ordeal. That I would rather have my teeth pulled than do all 19 minutes in one stretch.
advantage Aptera has over a company like Lordstown or Lucid is the fact that their vehicle is so much more simple. 6 main body components, only a couple of wheels, a couple of seats, and a substantially smaller battery pack than any of these other startups. You know, Lucid started with battery packs like 118 kilowatt hours, and Lordstown is well over 100 kilowatt hours in their battery packs. Those are not cheap. The battery pack is typically the most expensive part of an EV, and Aptera is starting with a 40 kilowatt hour battery pack. So I'm not saying they're going to be profitable the second they start production, but because their vehicle is inherently way more simple, they don't have a paint shop to worry about. Lucid and Lordstown and Rivian, they all have to have these very intricate, complicated paint shops, all that require complicated permits and paperwork to get approved because of how inefficient a paint shop is and how bad it is for the environment. There's all of these inspections that have to take place. Aptera gets to bypass that by relying on forged carbon composites as well as vinyl wraps, and those vinyls don't even take up a huge portion of the vehicle, so they're very easy to apply, very cheap to apply. And by making a vehicle with a much smaller battery pack that's far more efficient to build, that means that the cost to build each unit is going to be substantially lower for the Aptera than it will be for Lordstown or for Lucid. So
Well, so far, I don't know whether I'll stretch this much further, but so far he's talking and switching between little batteries and no paint shop. On the little battery aspect, they are intending to make a 100 kilowatt hour battery for an auto cycle. At least Lordstown's got 100 kilowatt hours for a large pickup truck. 100 kilowatt hours for an auto cycle is massive. Even 40 kilowatt hours is about the size of what the original Nissan Leaf came out with. I think it was a little bit smaller. So here's an autocycle with a launch edition that has a battery a bit bigger than a medium-sized car. On the no paint shop argument, well, firstly, if they're building such a smaller vehicle and not painting it, then they should be quicker to production than the 16 years they've taken so far. I'll be kind and just say the time they've taken since 2019. It's a little autocycle with little batteries, so he says, and yet he's saying that's justification for taking a long time to produce. There's also a solution to all the complications, the paperwork and such, for getting a paint shop operating. All they need to do is make the things unpainted and send them round to a good paint shop locally. It's that simple.
The path towards profitability, or the number of vehicles that Aptera has to ramp up to, is way, way lower than that of what these other brands have to ramp up to before they actually start turning a profit. Which works in Aptera's favor because they're mass producing a two-seater, which is already not inherently, as big a demographic as, say, an SUV or a pickup truck. But that's the other thing that annoys me about all of the skepticism around Aptera, is that people say, oh, they're a scam or they don't exist, but then unrelated start to complain about, well, they're a scam because no one's going to want to buy that vehicle, even though we have evidence that is literally not true. There is a huge growing community of Aptera fans, and that's why they have over 42,000 paid reservations and growing.
Well, this is all nonsense too. I don't know anybody who says that it's a scam because the demographic for selling them is small. Where does he get these arguments from? My suspicion that it's a scam is because they take money and they don't make anything, not over many years, and they've already folded once, and they're making the same excuse for folding again.
And by making a vehicle with a much smaller battery pack that's far more efficient to build, that means that the cost to build each unit is going to be substantially lower for the Aptera than it will be for Lordstown or for Lucid. So the path towards profitability, or the number of vehicles that Aptera has to ramp up to, is way, way lower than...
The profitability is not dependent on the size of the product. There is profitability in selling boxes of matches. The profitability depends on the amount you can sell it for over and above the amount it costs to make. Size has nothing to do with it.